everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time we're going to be tackling someone who's both fascinating and controversial, Julius Evola.
Oh, yeah, he's definitely someone who gets people talking.
He does. We're going to be focusing specifically on his perspective on fascism in Italy,
Okay.
as laid out in his book, Fascism Viewed from the Right. Now, before anyone listening thinks we're going to be diving headfirst into some pro-fascist rant,
Yeah.
let me assure you that is not what this is about.
Right.
Evola's take on this is way more complex than that.
Yeah, that's right. Evola wasn't just a fan of Mussolini.
Right.
He was looking at fascism through a very specific lens,
Okay.
that of traditionalism.
Okay.
He was trying to see if this movement, for all its flaws,
Yeah.
had the potential to revive the traditional values and social structures that he believed were so essential for a strong and meaningful society.
Okay, so traditionalism, what exactly does that mean in this context? Can you just paint a picture for us?
So imagine a society structured around hierarchy, spirituality, and a state that's more than just a bureaucratic machine.
Okay.
Think back to ancient Rome or medieval Europe, where there was a clear sense of order, purpose, and a focus on something bigger than just individual desires.
Okay, I'm starting to get a society built on strong foundations.
Yeah.
Sort of like a well-constructed building.
Right.
But why is this context of traditionalism so important when we're looking at Evola and fascism?
Because to understand Evola's view of fascism,
Yeah.
you kind of have to understand the state of Italy before Mussolini came to power.
Okay.
It was a period of just chaos and uncertainty. Imagine a country with a weak liberal democracy,
Right.
where shadowy groups like the Freemasons had significant influence,
Okay.
where the monarchy had lost its authority, and the nation as a whole seemed to be kind of drifting without a clear purpose.
Ah, so from Evola's perspective, it was like the building was crumbling.
Yeah.
In desperate need of repair.
Yeah.
Is that why he initially saw some appeal in what fascism was trying to do?
Exactly. Evola believed that one of the early successes of fascism was its attempt to reassert the importance of the state.
Mm.
He saw the state not as just like a bunch of offices and paperwork, but as a powerful force,
Yeah.
almost like an entity in itself, capable of shaping the people
Right.
and embodying a higher ideal.
So instead of the building collapsing,
Right.
fascism was trying to prop it up and reinforce its structure.
That's a good analogy.
Mm.
And Evola was fascinated by this idea of the state as a form that could shape the matter of the people,
Okay.
much like a sculptor molds clay into a specific form.
Yeah.
He saw a connection there with ancient philosophies, like the ideas of Aristotle.
Now that's interesting. So it's like he saw fascism as trying to impose order onto this chaos,
Yeah,
using the state as a tool to reshape society according to these traditional ideals.
right.
But I'm guessing it wasn't as simple as that, right? I mean,
Right.
Evola wasn't just a blind supporter.
You're absolutely right. Evola saw both the positives and the negatives in fascism's approach. One of the areas where he had some complicated feelings was the way fascism used the imagery and rhetoric of ancient Rome.
I remember reading about that. Yeah, he seemed to appreciate the connection to a glorious past,
Yeah,
but also felt like something was missing.
exactly. Evola felt that fascism, while trying to evoke this Roman ideal, didn't really grasp the deeper essence of what made Roman civilization great.
Right.
It was more like putting on a Roman toga without truly understanding the values and principles that it represented.
So style over substance.
Yeah, pretty much.
It sounds like Evola was looking for a more profound and authentic connection to tradition than what fascism was offering.
Yeah.
And for what I understand, he wasn't a big fan of how fascism seemed to blend with nationalism. Is that right?
That's a key point. For
Yeah.
Evola, nationalism was too focused on emotions and sentimental attachments,
Okay.
almost like tribalism.
Yeah.
It lacked that higher spiritual and metaphysical dimension that he saw in traditionalism,
Okay.
which transcended blood and soil.
So for Evola, true traditionalism went beyond simple patriotic feelings.
Right.
It had to be rooted in something deeper, something more universal.
Precisely. He believed in a kind of pan-European ideal, a shared spiritual and cultural heritage that connected different nations on a deeper level.
Okay.
Something that nationalism, especially in its more populist forms, just simply couldn't achieve.
That's a fascinating distinction.
Yeah.
And it helps to explain why Evola had such a problem with the idea of the one-party state, something that was central to the fascist system.
Right.
It seems counterintuitive at first, a traditionalist opposing a single unified authority.
But for Evola, the concept of party itself was inherently problematic.
Okay.
He saw it as an extension of democratic division and factionalism, the very things he was opposed to.
I see. So for him, a true state should embody the totality of the nation, not
Yes.
just one particular faction or ideology.
Exactly.
It's like he's saying that a healthy body can't be ruled by just a single organ.
Exactly. And this critique of the party system leads us to another major point of contention for Evola,
Okay.
the cult of the leader.
Ah, yes. The whole Mussolini as the ultimate strongman image.
Right.
I'm guessing that wasn't exactly in line with Evola's ideal of leadership?
You're catching on quickly.
Yeah.
Evola was very critical of the way fascism promoted Mussolini as this charismatic personality who was supposed to embody the will of the nation.
Right.
He felt it really cheapened the idea of leadership.
So what did Evola see as true leadership then? What was the alternative to this cult of personality that fascism was promoting?
For Evola, true leadership wasn't about rallying the masses or appealing to popular sentiment.
Okay.
It was about embodying a higher authority, a different kind of being almost.
Right.
Someone who commands respect through their inherent nature
Mm.
and their distance from the everyday concerns of the people.
Okay, so not someone that you just like slap on the back and have a beer with,
Right.
but someone you would approach with a sense of awe and respect. Someone who embodies those traditional values of strength and wisdom.
Evola even used the term pathos of distance to describe this ideal of leadership.
Oh, wow.
He believed leaders should inspire not through familiarity, but through a sense of otherness,
Right.
a kind of elevated presence.
It's a fascinating concept, and it really makes you think about how different his view of leadership was from the kind of populism we often see in modern politics.
Absolutely. And it's just one example of how Evola's traditionalist lens led him to critique even those aspects of fascism that might seem, at first glance, to align with his worldview.
Yeah.
That's not the-
Fascinating stuff. So
No,
we've
only just scratched the surface here.
yeah, there's some more to dig into.
There's a lot more to unpack with Evola and his critique of fascism.
Definitely.
So stay tuned, because in our next part, we're going to delve even deeper into his ideas.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about things like corporatism and
Yes.
and even his views on race.
His very complicated views on race.
Right. So make sure to join us for part 2 of this deep dive into the world of Julius Evola and his perspective on fascism.
That'd be a good one.
See you then.
See ya.
Okay, so we've been exploring how Evola, with his traditionalist perspective, saw both the potential and the pitfalls of fascism.
Yeah.
It's clear that he wasn't afraid to critique the movement,
Right.
even while seeing it as a force trying to push back against the tide of modernity he saw as so destructive.
Right.
Now, there's one aspect of Evola's thought that we need to address head-on,
Yeah.
because it's often misunderstood and misrepresented: his views on race.
You're absolutely right. This is a topic that requires careful consideration.
Yeah.
It's easy to jump to conclusions about Evola's views on race, especially given the historical context.
Right.
But it's crucial to understand that he vehemently rejected the kind of biological, materialistic racism promoted by the Nazis.
Okay.
He saw that as crude and ultimately incompatible with his traditionalist worldview.
So if he wasn't on board with the Nazi version of racism, what was Evola's own take? What did he mean when he talked about race?
Evola's concept of race was more about an inner race,
Okay.
something that transcended physical characteristics or genetics.
Mm-hmm.
He believed that race was about a spiritual and cultural essence,
Okay.
a way of being in the world that was shaped by tradition, values, and a particular way of life.
So instead of looking at outward appearances or bloodlines, Evola was more interested in what we might call a person's inner character,
Yeah.
their spiritual and cultural inheritance. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yes, that captures the essence of his idea.
Okay.
He believed this inner race was something that could be cultivated and strengthened through discipline, self-mastery, and adherence to higher principles.
Mm.
He even saw the potential for fascism to create a new kind of Aryan-Roman ideal,
Okay.
blending the best of both traditions.
Aryan Roman. Now that's an interesting combination, especially given what we discussed earlier about Evola's critique of fascism's somewhat superficial use of Roman imagery.
You've hit on a key point. Evola believed that the original Aryan spirit, as he understood it, emphasizing strength, discipline, and spiritual awareness, was present in both ancient Rome and the Germanic peoples,
Okay.
but that it had become corrupted over time.
Mm.
He saw an opportunity for fascism to tap into that original spirit and reshape the Italian character.
It's almost like he saw the potential for a kind of cultural and spiritual rebirth.
Yeah.
using this concept of the inner race to transcend the limitations of biological determinism.
Right.
But how does this idea of an inner race square with the fact that fascist Italy did implement discriminatory policies against certain groups, like Jews?
That's a valid question, and it's where things get more complicated.
Yeah.
While Evola was not advocating for racial persecution the way that the Nazis did,
Okay.
he did view Judaism as a distinct spiritual race with its own particular characteristics, some of which he saw as incompatible with his traditionalist ideals.
So while he wasn't endorsing the kind of violent, racially motivated policies we saw in Nazi Germany, there's still a potential for his ideas about race to be used in ways that could justify discrimination and exclusion.
That's a point we can't shy away from. Evola's views on race, even when viewed in the context of his time, are problematic
Yeah.
and need to be approached with a critical eye.
Right.
But for the sake of understanding his overall critique of fascism,
Okay.
it's important to see how this concept of the inner race tied into his belief that the Italian people themselves were partly to blame for the movement's failure.
He blamed the Italian people. That seems pretty harsh. What was his reasoning there?
Evola argued that Italians, on the whole, lacked the spiritual depth, the discipline, and the willingness to truly embrace the demanding ideals of a traditionalist order.
Right.
He saw them as too individualistic,
Okay.
too focused on material comfort, and lacking a sense of higher purpose.
It's almost like he's saying that the Italian people weren't the right clay for fascism to mold, that they lacked the necessary qualities to be shaped into this new Aryan Roman ideal he envisioned.
You're getting at the core of his critique. Okay. He even pointed to the rapid collapse of fascism after Mussolini's downfall as evidence of this lack of commitment and inner strength among the Italian people.
That's a pretty scathing assessment.
It is.
But it makes me think about something we discussed earlier, the idea of fascism as a flawed attempt to restore a traditional order.
Yeah.
Do you think that Evola saw the Italian people's supposed shortcomings as the main reason for that failure?
It was definitely a major factor in his analysis.
Okay.
He believed that even with the right leadership and the right ideas,
Right.
a traditionalist revival could only succeed if the people themselves were willing to embody those ideals, to make the necessary sacrifices and embrace a higher purpose.
So it's not just about imposing a system from above.
Right.
It's about cultivating a certain mindset,
Yeah.
a certain character within the people themselves.
Exactly. And for Evola, this was where fascism ultimately fell short.
Okay.
He felt that it failed to truly transform the Italian character,
Right.
to instill those traditional values of discipline, self-sacrifice, and spiritual awareness that he believed were so essential for a strong and meaningful society.
It's a sobering thought. And it makes me wonder if Evola believed any society in any era could truly live up to his demanding standards.
That's a good question.
I mean, were the ancient Romans, whom he so admired, really all that different?
Right.
I mean, weren't they also susceptible to corruption, decadence, and the pursuit of worldly pleasures?
Those are excellent questions, and they get at the heart of the tension in Evola's thought
Okay.
between his idealistic vision of a traditionalist order
Yeah.
and the often messy realities of human nature.
Right.
But despite his pessimism, Evola never fully abandoned the belief that renewal was possible.
Okay.
He held on to the idea that even in the darkest of times,
Right.
the seeds of tradition could be preserved and eventually sprout anew.
So it's not about romanticizing the past or trying to recreate some bygone era,
Right.
but about finding ways to rekindle those timeless principles and adapt them to the challenges of our own time.
That's a very insightful way to put it.
Yeah.
For Evola, traditionalism wasn't about clinging to old forms.
Okay.
It was about tapping into a deeper wellspring of wisdom and applying it to the ever-changing circumstances of human life.
It's a challenging task, no doubt, and one that raises a lot of questions.
Yeah.
But I think it's a concept that resonates with a lot of people today. This idea of seeking meaning and purpose in a world that often feels chaotic and adrift.
Right.
We're seeing a renewed interest in tradition, in spirituality, in the idea of community and belonging.
That's a fascinating observation, and it speaks to the enduring power of Evola's ideas.
Yeah.
Even if we don't agree with all of his conclusions,
Right.
he forces us to ask ourselves,
Yeah.
what are the values we want to preserve and pass on? What are the foundations of a truly meaningful life?
Right.
And how do we balance individual freedom with a sense of duty and responsibility to something larger than ourselves?
It's like he's throwing down a gauntlet, challenging us to look beyond the surface and grapple with some of the deeper questions that have always haunted humanity.
Absolutely.
And speaking of challenging questions, there's one more aspect of Evola's thought that I think is particularly relevant today.
Okay.
His idea of fascism as a third way between communism and capitalism.
Mhm.
Can you unpack that for us a bit?
Absolutely. This goes back to Evola's fundamental critique of both economic determinism and excessive individualism.
Okay.
He saw communism as a system that crushed the individual under the weight of the collective,
Right.
while capitalism, in his view, glorified greed and undermined traditional values and social structures.
So he was looking for a path that avoided the pitfalls of both those systems,
Yeah.
something that recognized the importance of individual initiative,
Right.
but also the need for a strong guiding state that upheld higher principles.
Exactly. He envisioned a system that balanced individual freedom with a sense of duty and responsibility to the common good.
Okay.
A system where the economy served the needs of the state and ultimately a higher purpose, not just the pursuit of profit.
It's a vision that resonates with a lot of people today who feel disillusioned with both the excesses of unfettered capitalism and the failures of state-controlled economies.
Right.
People are hungry for alternatives, for systems that recognize both individual agency
Yeah.
and the importance of community and shared values.
It's a testament to the enduring power of Evola's ideas that they continue to provoke debate and inspire new ways of thinking about the challenges we face.
Yeah.
He might not have all the answers,
Right.
but he certainly asks the right questions.
And on that note, I think we've explored the depths of Evola's perspective on fascism.
We have.
It's been a journey through some challenging and controversial territory,
It has.
but ultimately, I think a rewarding one.
I agree. Whether you find Evola's ideas inspiring or appalling,
Right.
there's no denying that he offers a unique and often unsettling perspective on the 20th century and beyond.
So we've spent a good amount of time now unpacking Evola's critique of fascism in Italy, and it's clear that he had some pretty strong opinions on where the movement went wrong.
Yeah. But I'm curious, did he ever talk about what he thought fascism should have done differently? Was there an alternative path he envisioned? There was, and this is where things get even more fascinating.
Okay.
Evola actually believed that fascist Italy made a critical error in aligning itself so closely with Nazi Germany. He felt this alliance ultimately led Italy down a disastrous path.
That's surprising. I mean, the whole Rome-Berlin axis thing seems so central to the story of fascist Italy.
Right.
What made Evola so opposed to it?
Well, remember, Evola was a traditionalist first and foremost.
Yeah.
And he saw the Nazis with their emphasis on biological racism and a kind of Germanic paganism as being fundamentally incompatible with the kind of spiritual and cultural revival he was looking for.
So even though both movements were authoritarian and opposed to liberalism, Evola saw a fundamental clash of values between them. It's like they were speaking different languages, even though they were both wearing the same uniform.
That's a great way to put it. Evola believed that Italy, with its own unique cultural and spiritual heritage, should have charted a different course.
Okay.
He actually saw more natural affinities between Italy and the other nations of the pre-World War I Triple Alliance,
Okay.
Germany and Austria-Hungary.
Now that's a twist. So instead of siding with Hitler, he thought Italy should have stuck with its old allies.
Right.
That seems counterintuitive given how World War I played out.
It might seem that way at first, but remember, Evola was looking at the world through a very different lens than most political commentators of his time.
Okay.
He was less concerned with geopolitical strategy and more interested in the underlying cultural and spiritual currents that he believed shaped the destiny of nations.
So he saw something in those Central European powers that resonated with his traditionalist vision.
Exactly. He felt that the shared traditions and values of those countries, the emphasis on discipline, hierarchy, a strong authoritarian state, and a deeper connection to European history and culture, were more in line with the kind of order he was advocating for.
It's almost as if he saw a missed opportunity for a different kind of alliance.
Yeah.
One that could have countered both the materialism of the West and the collectivism of the Soviet Union.
That's a very perceptive observation. Evola believed that fascism, if properly understood and implemented, could have offered a third way, a path that rejected both the excesses of individualism and the dangers of totalitarian collectivism.
It's fascinating to consider what might have been if history had taken a different turn.
Yeah, it is.
But as we know, that's not what happened.
Right.
Fascist Italy did align itself with Nazi Germany, and it ultimately led to their downfall.
Yes.
And as we discussed earlier, Evola placed some of the blame for that downfall on the Italian people themselves.
Yes, and that's one of the most controversial aspects of his thought.
Yeah.
He argued that Italians, by and large, lacked the necessary spiritual depth, the discipline, and the willingness to embrace the demanding ideals of a traditionalist order.
He seems to be saying that the form of the fascist state couldn't effectively shape the matter of the Italian people. They simply weren't the right material for the kind of transformation he envisioned.
That's a good way to summarize it.
Yeah.
Evola believed that a true revival of tradition required more than just political structures and strong leaders.
Right.
It demanded a certain character, a certain inner strength and moral fiber that he felt was lacking in Italian society at the time.
It's a pretty bleak assessment, but it does raise some interesting questions about the role of culture and values in shaping the destiny of nations.
He does.
If Evola were alive today, what do you think he would make of the world we live in?
That's a question that's both fascinating and a bit unsettling to ponder.
Yeah.
Given his profound pessimism about the trajectory of modern civilization, it's likely he would find much to lament in our contemporary world.
Yeah, the decline of religion, the rise of consumerism, the fragmentation of community, the erosion of traditional values.
Yeah.
All of those trends he saw as symptoms of spiritual decay are even more pronounced today.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And yet even Evola, with his often bleak outlook, never completely abandoned the possibility of renewal. He believed that even in the darkest of times, the seeds of tradition could be preserved and eventually sprout anew.
So it's not about clinging to the past or trying to recreate some bygone era,
Right.
but about finding ways to rekindle those timeless principles and adapt them to the challenges of our present moment.
Precisely. Evola believed that true traditionalism wasn't about blind adherence to old forms and structures. It was about tapping into a deeper wellspring of wisdom and applying it to the ever-changing circumstances of human life.
That's a challenging task, to be sure, and one that requires a lot of careful thought and discernment.
That is.
But I think it's a message that resonates with a lot of people today
Mm.
who are searching for meaning and purpose in a world that often feels chaotic and adrift.
I agree. And that, I think, is the enduring legacy of Julius Evola.
Yeah.
Whether you agree with him or not, he forces us to confront some of the most fundamental questions about the nature of society,
Right.
the meaning of tradition, and the purpose of human existence.
He was a thinker who refused to shy away from difficult questions, and his ideas continue to provoke and challenge us even decades after his death.
They do.
He may not have provided all the answers,
Right.
but he certainly knew how to ask the right questions.
And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the mind of Julius Evola. It's been a journey through some challenging and often controversial territory,
It has.
but I hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking.
I second that. We've explored Evola's critique of fascism, his vision of traditionalism, and his often provocative views on race and the fate of Western civilization. It's a lot to take in, but I encourage you to continue exploring his work and to grapple with the questions he raises. Even if you disagree with his conclusions, there's much to be learned from engaging with his unique and often unsettling perspective. Thanks for joining us on this intellectual adventure.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody.